to Anne Leadbeater, who's come all the way from, I think she's come from Lithgow. So, this presentation, this workshop today has been kindly organised by the Department of Communities and Justice, so thanks to the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice for making this happen. Anne Leadbeater is a leader in community recovery and resilience. Following the 2009 Black Saturday fires, Anne coordinated the initial recovery efforts for the King Lake Ranges communities. She has also worked in communities recovering from drought, flood, cyclone and earthquakes across Australia and New Zealand. So obviously a wealth of experience there. Anne was lead writer on the review of the National Community Recovery Handbook and has authored papers on communicating in emergencies and community leadership in disaster recovery. So thank you for coming, Anne, and I'm sure we're going to enjoy it today and learn a lot, so I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for taking the time to be here. I know how hard it is to get a lot of time in your diary at this critical phase, so I'm really grateful for you taking the time, and hopefully we can share some information that will make your current work go a bit smoother. So I'm really keen to just whip quickly around the room and find out who's here. So can you just let me know maybe your name and what you're doing, or how it is that you come to be in this lovely space. So can I start with you?
I'm Vanessa Glendani, Regional Manager for Service New South Wales.
Hi Vanessa, thanks.
And I'm Brandon Zambropoulos, and I'm the Council Relationship Manager for Service New South Wales.
This is a kind of an emerging space for you guys. Definitely, yes. So that's great, yeah.
Hi, I'm Catherine Stewart. I'm a member of the Wallangilly Resilience Network, which is a community member of the Wallangilly Council. Leaders and Recovery Advisory Committee.
Right, thank you. That's great. Thank you for being here.
Rob Moran, Wallangilly Council.
Rob.
Yeah, Ali Dench, Executive Director of Wallangilly Shire Council, but also the local community recovery coordinator.
Fantastic.
Of which Peter did an amazing job when I was on leave.
Yeah,
just
great.
recently.
Okay, so it's a good chance for upskilling, isn't it, the old emergency recovery? So that's fantastic. Thank you. Go over here.
Sandra Harlow, I'm a member of Wallangilly Recovery Resilience Community.
Fantastic. That's such an interesting structure, so I'm keen to learn more about that. So, and the lady's just sitting there. Sorry, can put you on the spot.
Kerry O'Grady, President of the Country Women's Association and managing the Recovery Hub at Balmoral.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kerry.
Christine Wildsmith, Community Links Wellbeing, also a member of the Recovery and Resilience Committee.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I'm Alison Morgan with the Office of Emergency Management, and I'm chairing the Regional Recovery Committee that sits, Wallangilly is one part of it. So working with Wallangilly Council.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alison.
Greg Duffy, I'm the General Manager of Community Links Wellbeing.
Vanessa Newenhouse, Office of Emergency Management.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Peter Wright, I'm the Manager of Community Outcomes here at Wallangilly Council.
Fantastic. And our camera operator.
Tian Tippett from Wallangilly Council.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you so much. I have to say that I've had 16 years in local government. It's the level of government I love the best. So I'm really pleased to be here with so many council people today. I did do 2 years in state government in emergency management, and then since then I've been working on my own. But I do think about and read about and work in recovery a lot, and that journey was started when we had disaster in our own community of King Lake in 2009, and on that afternoon we had 747 properties that were lost, homes that were lost, and 46 people who lost their lives in our community. So the impact of that is very profound and very long lasting, and it sort of set me on a bit of a journey to try and understand recovery a bit more, understand what helps, understand what gets in the way. And so I've done a bit of research around that. I've also written some local and national policy. As Peter mentioned, I was in charge of the rewrite of the Community Recovery Handbook. So I'm a bit of a recovery wonk. I spend a lot of time kind of mulling it over and thinking about it and having conversations like this. And so there's a few things that have stood out for me over the time that I've been working in the space, and that's what I wanted to share with you today. So when we talk about recovery, this is probably the most crucial message, and that is that people need to be at the centre of what we do. In Western societies and developed countries, we get very exercised about building stuff. When we have a disaster, we kind of throw all our efforts and energy into rebuilding physical infrastructure, restoring roads, repairing bridges and those things are very important, but they're really only important because they matter to people. If we had taken your fire, if we could take your fire and lift it up and take it to some remote part of Western Australia, for example, not to pick on WA, but if we were to do that, we wouldn't be having this conversation because that event wouldn't have impacted on people's lives and livelihoods. We wouldn't even be in all likelihood describing it as a disaster. We'd just be talking about it as a fire. So that's the difference. That's a critical difference. Is it impacting people? Yes. And then that's what we then need to think about as we work on our recovery. Now, at its most fundamental, I have come to learn that the impact of a disaster is a loss of control over your life. And that loss of control can happen over days and weeks. Slow-moving flood that's coming, or a fire that's burning off into the, to the national park, and it might come and it might come in. To the extent where people say, I just wish it would come already. I just wish this would be over. There's that growing anxiety and distress as time passes. Or the loss of control can happen in a matter of minutes, as it did here with the Japanese earthquake and tsunami. But regardless of how it happens, the impact for people tends to be remarkably similar. And that is, you try and imagine what the next bit of your life looks like, and you're off the map in terms of your lived experience. You can't think about how you do your life anymore. You just don't know what comes next. So, and that's a very distressing experience, and it's also quite true of people who are impacted by the disaster and those who are working in response and recovery, because maybe we've never been here before either, so it can be a very challenging time. So if that makes sense, that when you have a disaster, for a time you lose control of your life, then hopefully this will make sense too, and that is that the work of recovery is about helping people regain control. We want to be in the business of helping people get back into the driver's seat of their own lives and know that they have some control over what their life is going to look like going forward. Now, the thing that people need, above all other things, to be able to feel a sense of control is communication. It's really hard to feel like you're in control of things if you don't know what's going on. That's fair enough, isn't it? If you don't think you've got the information that you need to make good decisions, then that feeling of being out of control can actually be made worse. Communication absolutely underpins every aspect of recovery. I've never worked with a community that said, we knew too much. That never happens. That never happens. You can never do too much of this. And in fact, it's not just enough, though, just to communicate. You actually need to be communicating in a certain way. So the communication needs certain characteristics. And it really, above all things, needs to be honest. So honest communication to the community. People in communities will withstand an enormous amount of disappointment and distress as long as they feel like they're being dealt with honestly and you're being straight with them. The communication needs to be consistent. Now, there's a lot of confusion as recovery evolves, and certainly in the earlier stages, and maybe even in the later stages too, where there can be competing or conflicting information that's going to the community. Now, what happens when you're in recovery and you get conflicting information is that you don't think, well, I believe them or them. You disregard the whole lot. No one knows what's going on. This is chaos. It would be like if you went to the GP and got a really important and profound bit of information about your health, and then you went to a specialist and you got a completely opposing piece of information about your health. You would not be reassured by that, would you? You'd be starting to think, I don't know who to listen to, and I don't know what to believe. And so it is with recovery information. We've got to be on the same page before we go to the community as much as we possibly can. It doesn't mean things won't change. What we think is the case today might be different in 2 days' time, but we can at least be consistent in our messaging around that. We don't want to be having different points of view reflected. The information needs to be accessible. Now, I can't tell you how many times we were told after our fire, it's all right, it's all on the website. Everything you need to know is on the web. Just jump on there and you'll be able to look at it all. And it's like, Yeah, great. If we had houses with power and computers, we could jump onto the internet, but we have none of those things. So two things happen here. One is, I still can't get the information I need, but the other is, I've had a really clear message about the fact that you've got no idea what's going on for me. The fact that you're telling me to do something that I absolutely can't do means that you don't know what is happening in my life. And so suddenly now we're a bit further apart than we might have otherwise been. So when I say accessible, I mean that in the broadest sense. Can I actually get the information? When I do get it, can I understand it? You know, is it what I need to know? And, you know, will it help me to make good decisions for my recovery? And then we're getting down to, is it translated in the language that I need it to be? Is it in plain English, etc., etc. So accessible in the broadest context. The information needs to be timely. On our first day after the disaster, the issues that we were really struggling with were water and fuel. That's it, that's what everyone was talking about. We need water and we need petrol and diesel. Now, our petrol station had burnt down when the fire went through, so that was really a big issue for people. By the 8th day after our disaster, people were asking about things like my BAS statements are due, and I have to pay my council rates, and I used to have a house and now I don't, so I don't know how much I'm supposed to pay, or I'm ready to reopen my business, but I need to have a WorkSafe inspection before I can let the staff back in. You know, so you can see even in 8 days, the complexity of the issues has evolved really quite a long way. Now, if we're still just banging on about fuel and water, when people are asking about BAS statements and, you know, inspections from WorkSafe, we've ceased to be relevant to the people in their recovery because we're not keeping up with where they are. If we're talking about BAS statements and council rates on the first day after the disaster, they're going to bury us in a shallow grave. Yeah? You know, we're not actually going to get out of the meeting room alive. So we really need to be listening and trying to match our pace of recovery with where people are in their recovery journey. And we do that by listening to the questions that we're being asked and then using that to inform our information. It's terrific if the information comes from trusted, reliable sources. The trick here is that they have to be people that the community rely on and trust, not the people necessarily that we trust and rely on. So looking for those people in the community who can be spokespeople for our message and who can share our information and that will resonate with the community really well. Now that might be the local councillor or the local mayor or the local primary school principal or it might be none of those people. But there will be people who are going to have the ability to communicate effectively with the people you need to speak to, so it's really worthwhile finding out who those people are. As if all that wasn't complicated enough, the information needs to be continuously available. Now the reason for this is that people, none of us, don't know what we don't know. And you might be telling the community something today that I don't realise I need to know about. I won't know that I need to know about it until next Wednesday. But next Wednesday when I need that information, you've stopped talking about it because you talked about it today. Does that make sense? You know, we're not able to talk about every single thing every single day, but the problem is I won't listen to you today because I didn't know and I don't know that the piece of information that you have is going to be relevant because I'm not there yet. So somehow we've got to try and make this information available to people ongoing. Now that might be through printed newsletters. Recovery newsletters are often a popular way to do this. It might be that you have frequently asked question sheets that you can put out at community meetings or in the library or whatever. It might be that you, now that maybe power's restored and telecommunications have been improved, you might actually have a portal on your website. Here's all the stuff that we've been talking about in recovery. However you do it, just knowing that just saying something one time or 2 times or 10 times won't necessarily mean that everyone who needs to know will find out. And most importantly, the communication that we're engaging in now needs to be two-way. So we all have expertise and experience that we can contribute to recovery, the community has a very particular type of expertise about what it is to be living in a recovering community that they can actually provide to us. And it's when those two lots of information come together, and I'm so excited that you've got this resilience network because that's a great way for that to happen. It's when those experiences actually come together that we get the best picture of what will work and what will be able to support recovery. So a conversation is what we want to have. Now what we now sadly know in Australia is that sometimes if a disaster is bad enough, actually communication is all there is. People will live or die based on their ability to get good information in order to make good decisions. We used this model in our recovery after 2009. It was also used by Mayor Giuliani after the terrorist attacks in New York. And it's been developed by a communications and a disaster specialist. And it comprises these four things. So any issue that you want to think about that the community might have questions about, you can actually run that issue through this framework and people will go away feeling quite well informed. So what do we know about the issue? I don't know, clean up properties, dangerous trees, damaged water tanks, you know, whatever the issue is. Okay, here's what we know. Here's what we know to be a fact. Here's what we don't know. Here's some of the things that we're still trying to work out. Here's what we're doing, council or recovery agencies, here's what we're doing, and here's what we need you to do. Now if you think about those four things, if you were to hear all of that, if you were a member of the community, you'd go, okay, now I know some stuff about that. The most confronting thing to try and share, but probably the most important, is what we don't know. We're not usually in the business of that. We're talking about the stuff that we don't have answers for. We like to kind of concentrate on the things that we're pretty clear about. So sharing what you don't know is a very powerful thing to do because it actually will make partners of you and the community in finding the answers. You know, if you're at a community meeting and someone asks a question and you say, well, here's what we know, but here's what we don't know, you'll see people saying, well, you know what might work? You know what you could do? You know, you'll actually see people starting to help to problem solve with you and find things out that you need to know. If you don't share what you don't know, the community will assume that you do know and you're just not telling them. And so that's going to erode the trust. So being brave about sharing what you don't know is a really great strategy. Now, I'm very indebted to the work of Dr. Rob Gordon, who is a disaster psychologist who's based in Victoria, but who's worked in every disaster in Australia and internationally since the Ash Wednesday fires in 1983. And there's very little about disaster recovery that Rob does not know. He's an absolute giant in the field, and he has done a lot of work at looking at what happens to community structures after a disaster. So how do disasters actually disrupt the way communities work? And so based on his work, we can have a talk about these few diagrams that we're going to work through. And this first one is intended to represent the way community connections exist in times other than disaster. So we think about community. Now, we all belong to a community, don't we, where we live. It's usually how we identify that. I'm a member of the Picton community, I'm a member of the Walladilly community. You know, whereabouts we live in the world starts to kind of define that conversation. But we're also members of other communities within that community, aren't we? So we might have a work community, we might have a social community, we might have kids at school, so we might belong to the school community. We might be avid supporters of the local footy club, so we might belong to that football community or the sporting community. So we're all in different groups. And so these little groups here, oops, that's not what I wanted to do, is intended to represent those subgroups or those sub-communities, shared interest, common interest. This might be council, the council community. This might be the Chamber of Commerce, and maybe this is the education providers, and this might be the health services, And maybe this is the Wallandilly Poodle Breeders Association. You know, you get the idea. It's the things that people care about and that they connect around. Then there's these guys, you know, that aren't really well connected to the community at all. They're out on their own. Maybe they're isolated by choice. Maybe they're socially isolated just by virtue of their situation. But even those people, there's usually at least a connection. And it might be a service provider or a concerned family member or a friend or whatever. So all of these connections go to make up the network that is our community. And that structure provides a number of important things which are listed down the side of the slide there. So it's multidimensional. That structure meets our normal needs. It provides emotional support. It helps us to identify ourselves within the community. How do we belong? How do we fit? Importantly, it provides a sense of differentiated closeness. So we're close, but we're different. And that's how communities are when you think about them. Everyone is not the same. There's groups of people together, but they're all different. So when we have a disaster impact, what we can see with that complex network of connections is they get disrupted and broken by the passage of the disaster. In this case, the fire front, if you imagine it that way, sweeping through, and in its wake, there's a whole lot of people who for a time are quite on their own. They're quite disconnected, or as Rob describes it, debonded from their community connections and their community structure. And that's a very isolating and distressing space to be. Given an amount of time, some of these bonds reform. So it might be about, you know, I went down the road and checked on my neighbour, and we checked in on each other and made sure I was able to find out where my kids were, you know, and we were able to meet up. You know, so you start to see the pieces of the puzzle and pieces of the connection starting to re-establish themselves. Now, while people are in this state, there's something really important happening to them. And that is that they're, in all likelihood, likely to be experiencing high levels of adrenaline. Now, adrenaline is an amazing thing. It gets us ready to do one of three things. Anyone know what they are?
Fight, flight and freeze.
That's right. Fight, flight or freeze. Freeze is the kind of lesser known cousin of fight or flight, isn't it? We often talk about those two, but freeze is a very legitimate third option. And the thing about fighting, fleeing or freezing is that even though it's our brain that's going to determine which of those we're going to do, we don't have a lot of say over that. Unless we're highly trained, you know, individuals in the armed forces or in emergency services professionals, and we can train beyond our instinct. For most of it, it's an instinctive response. So adrenaline shuts down our executive functioning part of our brain, and it mobilises the reptile or the primitive part of our brain, the bit that reminds us to blink, you know, or breathe. And the reptile brain says, you know what, I reckon you should run, or I reckon you should fight, you know, and that's how this kind of gets set into motion. A lot of people can feel quite critical about themselves, about the actions they took at the height of the emergency. And the news is, you know, you don't really have a lot of choice, because instinctively you'll respond a certain way. It's a little bit like when a huntsman runs over your foot in the bathroom in the morning and you go, whoa, you know, you don't actually think, you know, I'm going to make a ridiculous noise and jump back. You know, it's not that part of your brain that's actually in control. It's just that instinct to do that. Now, the other thing about adrenaline is that it can reorganise your systems in ways that can help you to face this very mortal threat to your life that you might be facing. So if your reptile brain says, I reckon the best thing to do here is to run, it will actually alter the way your circulation works so that more blood will go to your legs and less blood will go to your arms, so you can run really fast. If your reptile brain says, you know, I think the best thing to do is just to freeze in place and be really quiet and try not to attract any attention, then your systems will be quietened down. Your heart rate will slow, your breathing will slow, so that you can almost appear like you might already have died, and thereby not attract attention to yourself in the sense of the threat. is all pretty amazing stuff, and it happens like that. So the other thing about adrenaline is it gives us access to reserves of energy and strength, and it heightens our senses. If we need to be able to smell really well, we'll be able to do that. If we need to be able to see a long way, we'll be able to see really well. We're not going to be able to hear, we're going to see. So there's a trade-off happening around the things that your brain is sensing that you need. The trouble with that is in that trade-off, a lot of useful stuff gets traded away in favour of being able to do all of these important things that we've just talked about. The sorts of things that are hard to do when you're in high adrenaline. Really hard to concentrate. Really hard to take in information. Because if you're being chased by a tiger, you're not stopping to read the contract, are you? You're just running. Like that's how your brain is sort of primed to behave. It's a very hard, and it's ironic because in recovery there is so much stuff you need to take in. There's so much information you need to process, and you're in a very bad place to try and do that. Sometimes commonly in fact, people will experience a loss of self-awareness, and so Rob refers to this as their feedback loop. And this is the stuff that actually helps you stay on the rails. I'm a bit tired, I should have a little rest. I'm a bit hungry, I should have a sandwich. Those things, those messages are not available to you when you're in high adrenaline. Because again, you're running from a tiger, you don't think, oh, I can't tell you, it's not critical to your survival, is it? So it's not even on the list of things. It's not even, something you're remotely considering. So the problem with that is that you can go for a really long time and you haven't eaten anything, you haven't had a drink, haven't remembered to use the bathroom, haven't had a rest, you're just going and going and going. Sometimes there can be a loss of social awareness as well when you're in high adrenaline. So you might not be, the person who's in high adrenaline might not be as cued into the social sort of cues that they would normally respond to. So people who are normally perhaps really easygoing, patient, might actually be feeling really impatient and angry and frustrated. They might be really loud when they're normally quite quiet. They don't behave in the ways that, they don't queue up for things. It's not who they are in that moment. Because of the high adrenaline, it's very hard to be really connected to the social cues. It's real hard to remember things. So your memory, the way you make memories, is affected by the presence of adrenaline, and it's really hard to make decisions. I always say to people, if you're working in recovery, wear your name badge, because you're going to meet people who've been impacted by disaster and say, hi, my name's Anne, and they're going to go, Anne, her name's Anne. Oh, hang on, what did you say her name was? Oh my God, I can't remember her name. We're going to say goodbye in a minute, and I haven't, this is going to be Anne. And so then all of the conversation that we're having is overtaken by the fact that that person's trying to remember my name, which is what I just said to them 2 minutes ago. So if we can think about how we help people remember, because it's really hard to do. So name badges, I'm going to tell you something, then I'm going to give it to you in writing so you can read about it when you're ready. Trying to reinforce the ability for people to actually retain what we're talking about. This is really hard. We had a thing in our community we called bushfire brain, which just meant all of this, all of this stuff, which was really seeming to get in the way of the things we needed to be able to do. It's hard to make decisions because the reptile part of your brain isn't good at weighing up options. It tends to be more concrete than that. Do this now, And so when you're faced with should I do this or that really requires executive thinking, doesn't it? The kind of weighing up and deciding which is better or worse. And the decisions that you have to make in recovery tend to all end up looking like they're equally important. So, ham and cheese or salad on my roll, what sort of car should I buy to replace the one that burnt in the fire? They feel like they're the same sort of decision. And of course they're not, but we'll agonise over stuff that actually isn't that important in the overall scheme of things. And maybe we'll rush to make decisions about things that will actually be quite important in the long term, because it's hard to differentiate between, the relative importance or not. People will often talk about the fact that their sleep is disturbed. So either they are not able to sleep in high adrenaline, or they're exhausted and they want to sleep all the time. It's very common for people to talk about feeling overwhelmed by the whole experience. So this whole thing of recovery is coming at me like a brick wall, and I can't think which brick to try and pull out to actually get something happening, because it all feels like it's just one big thing. There are a lot of uncertainties and worries about the future when you've had a disaster and you're in high adrenaline. So what will this all mean? You know, will my best neighbour move back, or are they going to move away forever? Will my kids be okay? They're having nightmares, they're wetting the bed, you know, I'm fighting with my partner, you know, there's all this stuff going on, and it all helps to reinforce that sense of uncertainty and that feeling of not being in control. Communities will often talk about the fact that they feel like the world's moved on. You know, you might be starting to hear that now. It's like, oh, well, everyone cared about us 2 weeks ago, and now no one knows what's happening, and no one knows what's going on. And that's a really common expression. I'd actually suggest that not only does the world need to move on, but we actually get to do our best recovery work when it has moved on. You know, like when we can actually just get down to the business of supporting communities. But by the same token, people can worry that there isn't that amount of interest or awareness of what's actually happening at the community level. And, you know, high adrenaline is true for people who've been affected by the disaster, and it can also be true for people actually working in the recovery. You might have felt your own adrenaline going up at different times, you know, the past little while, maybe impossible deadlines, incredible workloads, you know, and you can start to feel your own heart getting beating fast, and you start to, you know, experience some of these things perhaps. You'll certainly be working with people who are in this state on some level. The thing about adrenaline is that we're not actually built to stay in it for very long. It's meant to be a massive response to a certain threat of peril, you know, like it's not meant to be long term. But in recovery, it's quite common for people to stay in high adrenaline for a long, long time, much longer than they normally would. Weeks, months. And that's not good for people's well-being. It's not good for their health. We start to see, you know, acute and chronic health issues that come from people staying in high adrenaline. We also see mental health issues emerging for people in that state. So part of our challenge has to be to try and help people lower their adrenaline. And we do that best by having lower adrenaline ourselves. It's hard to de-escalate someone when you're already escalated. You know, like you have to try and just bring everything down a notch. So we turn to our community, and again to Rob's research, and this is the next phase that Rob has identified. So once those reconnections are able to start forming, pretty soon everyone is connected to everybody else in the post-disaster community. And all of the connections are pretty much similar. You know, there's no differentiation, there's no long and short connections, it's all just everyone connected around their common experience of the fire or the flood or the earthquake. And around those pretty sort of simple connections, a boundary can form. And that boundary can be quite impenetrable. And it might consist of something like, you're not from here. You know, you don't know. You don't know what our experience has been. Or it might be around, well, you know, you left and we stayed. So we are this group and you aren't part of that. Quite often recovery people, we're these guys. You know, hey, let us in. But because we aren't regularly members of this community or haven't had this shared experience, it's like, no. You know. Local government very often has people in this centre bit, so that's fantastic because you're either on the ground or you're really well known to the community, you've done lots of work with them, and you're part of that process. You might have been there when the disaster happened. So quite often you're in the circle, but for many other agencies who come after, you know, we're going to be on the outside trying to help and finding it's really difficult to break through. This structure isn't sophisticated enough to support community in the long term. It can't last, right? And it shouldn't last because it's an artificial response to, you know, the experience. Usually what happens is one day the blue dot looks at the red dot and says, you know, I've never liked you. I didn't like you before the fires, and I sure as hell do not like you now. You know, I do not want to be so closely connected to you because we don't have the same common interests. We don't care about the same things. We don't share the same values. And we wouldn't have been close if not for the fact that we did have this one thing that we had in common, which was the fire. And so we see this structure start to come apart. There are other things that can come in and break into this, which Rob refers to as cleavage planes. And they actually come in and they kind of crack into this structure. And an example might be, you were insured and I wasn't. Or you actually are rebuilding and I'm moving away. Or maybe you got a grant and I wasn't eligible. You know, so we can start to see these things come and break up this structure. The structure needs to come apart and it needs to reform back into that original sort of more complex connections that we saw at the beginning. What we want it to do though is to come apart gently. We don't want it to explode apart, you know, because that's going to be potentially the second disaster. So we want to find ways that we can help the community get back to the way that it used to operate and the connections that it used to value without kind of sustaining more damage. Now, in Australia, we divide the workup of recovery into these recovery domains or elements we talk about. You know, the built recovery, environment, the environmental recovery, we talk about the social recovery, the domain of social recovery. There's usually four. In Queensland there's five. To be different in Queensland, they have agriculture as a separate one. Some people have toyed with culture, you know, as a separate domain. You know, you get the idea that we can't be experts in every single thing. So the idea of this is that we get to commit our expertise into the environment that's going to be most useful. So we have our technical thinkers, our engineers, our building surveyors and inspectors and our architects, etc. might be focused on the built recovery. Environmental recovery is going to attract people from the Department of Primary Industries and Parks and, you know, Friends of the Wetlands and, you know, land care, etc. Economic recovery will be our chambers of commerce, our funders, our finance people, grant makers, you know, charities, etc. And then quite often the social recovery is going to be lots of people concerned with health and education and community services and, you know, welfare, etc. And that's generally how we focus our work. And that's great, that's a fine thing. Except if we get so invested in our bit that we forget to lift our head up and think, what else is happening? You know, we can't get so siloed by this structure that we lose track of what the other environments have happening. Because for the community, it's all of this. They don't get to just say, I only care about this part. They actually have to live through the whole thing. And the thing about disasters is it touches every aspect of your life. So there's not one single thing you will do after a disaster that is not through the lens of recovery. So we need to understand the equal importance of all of these. If we just think only about buildings, we will have a whole lot of new buildings, but we may not have a recovered community. So we have to bring all of this along. Now, the way this is represented is actually as a system. So recovery is a system, communities are systems, and the recovery is a system as well. And with systems theory, if you do one thing in one part of the system, there'll be a corresponding effect somewhere else. We need to know what that effect is, and we need to know whether we need to mitigate it or manage it. Now, if I can give you a quick example. As part of our recovery, our social recovery after the fires, the Bunnings Corporation provided a whole lot of $200 gift cards. So people who'd lost their homes or had homes damaged could get a $200 gift card, and they could go to Bunnings and start to buy the bits and pieces they need to actually get on with their recovery. Fantastic. A very generous, very well received, a really great initiative for the social recovery. The problem for us was that we don't have a Bunnings in our area. We used to have a local hardware, but what do you reckon happens when everyone in town goes out of town to buy their hardware stuff? The local hardware goes broke. Now, it limped along for a few years, but it never recovered from the impacts of all of that business going out of the area. So, a terrific initiative for our social recovery, not such a great outcome for our economic recovery. Does that make sense? So that's system theory in action. What we do here has an effect somewhere else. So we've got to think really carefully about that, because there's ways that can be managed, but unmanaged it can actually end up having a negative effect on the recovery. Now this is something that I wish that I had understood more about before we had our disaster, and that is stages of grief. Now I think it's fair to say that most of us would recognise if we have a friend or someone who's close to us who has a really big life-changing event personally. So in other words, they might have lost their relationship, or they might have been made redundant, or they might have been diagnosed with a serious illness or whatever, and we will tell ourselves and we'll tell them there's going to be some stuff to work through here before you're going to be sort of in a good place with this. It's going to take some time. And we would give them advice like just take time to think this through. Don't sell the house the week after your marriage breaks up, because you might have a different feeling about that in a few months. Maybe just sit with this for a bit, take some time to understand it and understand what it's going to mean. I think whole communities go through stages of grief after a natural disaster. So instead of this happening on an individual level, you've got it happening on a whole community level. And the reason that's hard for us as recovery practitioners is that we're going to be doing the work of our lives and people are going to be yelling at us, and we're going to be working as hard as we can, as long as we can, for as many hours as we humanly can, and people are going to be right up in our grill telling us how crap we are at our job. It's not going to be fun. And the reason that is hard is because it's going to be hard for us not to become defensive about that. Hey, don't yell at me. I've been here since 7 o'clock. This is not my fault. You can sort of see how that can start to happen, because it feels very unfair for someone to be yelling at you when you're working so hard. And so you become defensive, and they're already in high adrenaline, so they're already expecting a fight. Let the games begin. We've lost the day, haven't we? As soon as you become defensive in recovery, it's all over. So what we have to do, to really become really good at, is actually understanding what we're seeing. And that is that anger is one of the stages of grief. It's not about us. It's actually about people moving through this process. And so when people are angry and we say, don't be angry, we're actually stalling their recovery. We are standing in the way of the very thing they need to do in order to be able to get on and do the next bit. So that changes the nature of the work a bit, doesn't it? We've actually got to sit with people in their anger, in their distress, in their grief, and help support them through it, not try and encourage them not to experience it. And that takes quite a bit of courage and bravery on our part, because it's painful to do that. It's really hard to just allow people to be sad, or allow them to be angry and just sit with them while that happens. It's much easier to try and say, look, I want to make you feel better. The best work we can do is actually to support people to move through the process. So I understand that you're angry. I really understand that this has made you very angry. I wonder what it is that I can do to help you with this next little bit. How can I help you get through the rest of today? That's really the nature of the work. It's not, don't be angry. Don't be sad. It's okay. No, it's not. My house has just burnt down. It's not okay. So let's work to be able to walk alongside people in their grief and their distress rather than trying to encourage them not to experience it. The interesting thing about this diagram, one of the interesting things is the inclusion of guilt in the stages of grief. And guilt is a very prevalent emotion in disaster recovery. It's not a rational emotion, is it? Because unless you started the disaster, it's not going to be your fault. But there still will be lots of examples of people feeling guilty that we need to encounter and manage. The common one is I feel guilty because I've still got my house. You know, I've got my house, my neighbours down the road, their house burnt down, they've got 4 kids, you know, under 7 or whatever the case. So that feels unfair and I feel bad because that's the situation. In our disaster, we had people who felt guilty because they'd only lost their house when so many people had lost family members and friends, you know, and relatives. Small business people will often talk in whispers about feeling guilty, about the fact that they are worrying about going broke, or maybe having to lay off staff, some of whom have lost their houses. You see, that's really complex, isn't it? You know, I don't feel like I should be worrying about the fact that my business is going broke because other people have lost so much. But I still have to try and manage this situation and try and support the people who work for me, you know. So this is a really complex thing that we're understanding. We can't, again, encourage people necessarily not to feel guilt because it's part of their process or part of their recovery journey, but we can certainly try not to make them feel worse, you know, by how we relate to them and how we deal with them. Things like, you know, comments that you might overhear, people saying things like, I'm so lucky you didn't lose your house. But they're not feeling lucky, and they're actually feeling guilty. So just being mindful of that as we work through our interactions. The real shortcoming with this diagram is it's so neat. You know, there's boxes and arrows and in the top and out the bottom. Wouldn't it be great if it was like that? You know, it would be really useful. And it would be really great if people only did each of these once. That would also be helpful. We could tick it off. Yeah, you've been angry. Okay, let's move on. You know, it doesn't work like that either. In actual fact, people will go through these things a few times. They'll go back and have a couple of goes at some of them. They won't all go through them simultaneously. Would also be helpful. Angry week, stay away. You know, that's not it either. And also people will bring different things into this system. They might have a serious illness. They might already be in a relationship that was incredibly strained before the disaster. Maybe they've got a disability. Maybe they've got some mental health issues. So they're not all coming into this like an army of well-trained, you know, recovery people marching into the fray. They're going to come into it with lots of different challenges, and that will change the nature of the way this process works. So remember stages of grief. But when you do, picture this, because this is a much better representation of recovery. Yeah? This is much more what it feels like. And there are days when it feels absolutely like the roll of the dice as to whether you get 3 long snakes or 1 tiny ladder. You know, that's how this experience unfolds. This is the researchers' interpretation of the journey of recovery, and it's not just about Australia, it's actually disasters internationally as well. So they've done the research, they've plotted what happens to people, and this is the depiction that they've come up with. So they're researchers, they use some funny language, but we'll forgive them that. The first phase here, immediately after the disaster, they have named the heroic phase. And the heroic phase is characterised by feelings of altruism. Everyone looking out for each other. You know, the reporting around this stage is lucky escapes, acts of bravery, great generosity, people checking in and looking out for one another. And the focus is on family, friends and neighbours, so it has a very local focus. The next phase here is called the honeymoon. Again, curious language, but you get the picture. A sense of shared survival, anticipation of help, we will get all the help we need, and the ability to return to normal And the focus of the honeymoon is on community and outside agencies. So this is when the cavalry starts to arrive. It's all going to be okay, you know. So we see those two upticks in the morale and in the confidence and in the sort of feelings in the community. Now the researchers are telling us that this first phase lasts for between 1 and 3 days. In my experience, I reckon you've got a bit longer. I reckon it's about 3 weeks. I didn't do the research, so I'm cheeky to actually, you know, have that opinion, but I'm not sure whether it's just a little bit old. It's 1980 to 2000, so, you know, it's a while ago. It could be the way communities interact now, I'm not sure, but I do feel like you're going to be able to coast sort of okay for about 3 weeks, and then you wake up one morning and the wheels have completely fallen off. And the people that you were working along with really well last week are really angry, and everything seems to be going wrong, and the minister's office is on the phone, and it's all just going, you know, to hell in a handbasket. And I think that coincides with around about here. I think what happens is that people's levels of adrenaline are starting to go down, and their, you know, executive thinking capacity is starting to return, and they're starting to actually realise just how big and how awful this is going to be, and how long it's actually going to take to recover from. And so then we see this really big trough start to open up. And in that trough are all the things that people are likely to encounter. So anger, frustration, disputes, you know, red tape, trying to rebuild, arguments with the insurance company, arguments with council, whatever that might look like. A loss of support as agencies start to pack up and programs start to close. A real sense of being absolutely exhausted because adrenaline wears you out, and then that's replaced with cortisol, and that wears you out. And so, you know, what's happening for you internally is contributing to this really big slump. Groups in the community can weaken or fragment, and there's delays. Can't get the new stove, you know, it's on the wharf somewhere. So all those frustrations that are never something that you thought you would need to actually contend with. Eventually you overcome all of that and you come out of the other side of this process, hopefully relatively well and intact, and you're no longer needing to spend as much time and energy thinking about the disaster. You can actually start to think about other things. Now, the researchers are telling us that this phase lasts for between 1 and 3 years. And I would not dispute that at all. I think it's going to take every bit of 1 to 3 years to actually go through that. And it doesn't matter how much money there is, how much help there is, this is a process that people will have to travel through. And it's quite inevitable in its nature. What's not inevitable is how deep the trough needs to be. And the work we do in recovery can actually mean it's a bit shallower. People don't need to dip down quite so far. So recovery done well can mean that that dip is a little more gentle. Recovery done badly will mean that the dip is deeper than it would have otherwise been. We actually make people's situation worse when we do recovery badly. And in fact, we can often end up with communities recovering from the recovery, not recovering from the disaster anymore. Because the stuff that happens to them is so bad and so difficult to deal with that the actual fire or the flood or the storm hardly even seems like it was that hard anymore, because all the crap that's happened since then is the real challenge. So of course we don't want to be in the business of that. So some things to think about as we do the work. The pace and speed of recovery. Now there is no right pace for this stuff to happen. For some people, they're ready to go the day after the smoke clears. Let me at it. All I want to do is just get on with it. Other people are going, hang on a minute, can you just let me sit with this for a bit, because I need to understand what it all means. You know, so we're all different in terms of how fast or slow we need things to happen. What I would say though is in recovery, everything is important, but only some things are urgent. Everything can't be urgent, otherwise nothing's urgent. So we have to think about what is urgently needed here. Water, food, fuel, first aid, temporary accommodation, you know, some financial assistance. Those things need to be provided as quickly as we can. You won't get any accolades for having a community meeting about whether or not we should provide potable water. You know, like that's not going to be well received. Of course we should. People need water to drink, let's just get it done. Other things that are important actually are going to benefit from more of a strategic approach. They're not urgent. They're important, but they're not urgent. And those are the things we should actually take a bit more time with. Where are we going to rebuild the new hall? What should it look like? What sort of people and groups will need to use it? Those conversations are worth taking a bit of time over. If you do that stuff too quick, only the relatively unaffected people will be able to participate and have a say. Because the really affected people will just not be in the headspace to engage. And so then what you'll end up with is a recovery that's been informed by a cohort of people who actually haven't had the full gamut of the experience. And you will have actually managed to alienate a whole lot of people who would really have benefited from being able to have some control over what their communities look like, but it all happened too quick for them. So you may have to advocate quite strongly about slowing things down, because politically the equation is quick equals good. Fast is great. I have adapted a rather obscure analogy, as I want to do. And I was watching a program the other day that was about ballroom dancing, and it struck me that the foxtrot is the pace for emergency management. And the key pace for the foxtrot is slow, slow, quick, quick, slow. So prevention tends to be pretty slow. Preparedness, well, we'd like it to be quicker, but it tends to be pretty slow too. And then we have response and relief, quick, quick, recovery, slow. Not slow bad, because you try and actually foxtrot here. You know, it's not wrong to go slow, it's actually important to go slow, because that's the rhythm of that dance. And I think we can take something from that. Maybe we can't, I'm in your hands. But you know, quick, quick, slow is what we need to think about. Response is quick, relief is quick, and recovery needs to slow down a bit. Because if we take the lights and sirens of response into recovery, its chances are we're going to be running over people in our haste to get things done. So that's a message we need to, you know, shout loud and often. That just because it's fast doesn't mean it's going to be sustainable. It doesn't mean it's actually going to work for people, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be a quality recovery process. It'll just be fast. That's all. The good news is that communities know what they need. They knew what they needed before the fire, and they will still know what they need afterwards. If we have the conversations with community, they will be able to tell us what will work. They know what their communities can sustain. They'll be able to share that. We need lots of conversations so that we can get lots of voices about that. I only put this point in so I can nag you a bit more about communication. Yeah? The need for information is overwhelming. There was, I don't know if I've already said this, so stop me if I have. I've said this a few times in the last few days, but there's a very wise engineer from the city of Christchurch who I saw speak at a conference, and he said, if you're saying nothing, you're doing nothing. I remember thinking, well, that is a really important insight, because I reckon the engineers of Christchurch City Council after the earthquake were doing a lot. You know, they were pretty busy. But he had recognised that unless they were telling the community about what they were doing, the perception of the community is that nothing was happening. So remembering that if we're saying nothing, we're doing nothing. And of course we're not doing nothing, so we need to be saying a lot. People will spontaneously volunteer after a disaster. Some of them will be super useful. Some of them will be super not useful, you know, and this is our lived reality. They come pretty much every time, and we're shocked by it almost every time as well. You know, we've got to get better at not being shocked by this. There are a lot of motivations for spontaneous volunteering. There's a whole handbook about this. There's at least 5 motivations in the research, and only one of them is about helping. Okay, so this suddenly got real complicated, didn't it? There are at least 4 other motivations for why people spontaneously volunteer. We need to understand that stuff. And And we need to have processes and plans in place for utilising that goodwill and being able to identify the people who are going to be able to help and making sure that we are able to engage with them. This is not a message so much for now, but take note of what's happening now around spontaneous volunteering and what can we learn from that for next time. It's a good opportunity to plan. And as if that wasn't hard enough, people do this. They donate stuff. Damn it! All our eyes twitch at the mere mention of it, don't they? Like, oh, why would you do that? And of course we understand why people do it because they want to connect with the disaster. They want to, they want to share their concern. They've got this thing that they just know the poor 5 people will really need, and they want to make sure that they can get, And we say send cash, and sometimes people will, but sending cash doesn't actually scratch the itch that the person's actually experiencing. They really want to send you their stuff. Everyone I've ever spoken to in my career in emergency management who's had anything to do with donated goods will tell you it is an unmitigated disaster. There's nothing good to say about it. And I totally get that. I understand the pain. I certainly can remember our own experience of it. The flip side of this is that donated goods is a physical embodiment of love and care from outside of your community. Those donated jumpers and bicycles and pushers and dolls and teddies actually carry a message that says, we see you, we feel your pain, we want to try and help. So we've got to be a bit pragmatic about it. It's bad, but it's not all bad. There is some good that can come from it. It's very hard to manage equitably, and that's probably the biggest challenge. In an already unfair environment, disasters are inherently unfair, aren't they? Why did my house burn down? That house was not burnt down, and they never mow their grass. They got grass growing under their spouts. What's going on about that? We look for fairness. Why did the flood stop one street after my house and not one street before? That would have made my life a lot easier. We try and find the potential for equity in our lives and certainly in our disasters, and this stuff makes it really hard to maintain that. Because we never get enough of one thing, do we, in donated goods to give everyone one. That would be great. Okay, here is one of these for every person who's been affected. That would be terrific. It doesn't work that way. In our disaster in Victoria after 2009, one of the major corporations made available 1,500 beautiful new refrigerators. Stainless steel, double door, ice maker, the whole thing. Who wouldn't want one of those? Everyone has lost their fridge. We've got 1,500 fridges. We've got 2,350 homes lost. What are we going to do with that? Now we're in a world of pain, aren't we? Because we can't do this fairly. So that is one of the challenges with donating goods. Again, we can't be surprised by it because it happens every time there's a disaster. There are national guidelines for spontaneous volunteering. There are also national guidelines for managing donated goods. So people who've been through this pain before have done some thinking about this. So they'll commend those 2 documents for you to have a look at. But again, we're not allowed to be surprised by it and we need to get a plan. The research tells us that there are recovery peaks, and by that I mean increased periods of activity around recovery issues. And those peaks tend to happen 3 days, 3 weeks, 3, 6 and 12 months after the disaster. And that's interesting for us to know. And I think maybe the 3-week one is a bit like we talked about before, the adrenaline goes down and people start to realise what they're going to need, and so there'll be an upsurge of requests for help and assistance. The 6-month mark is a really interesting one. We will, and do in Australia, commonly see people presenting for assistance for the first time 6 months after the disaster. And we say, where have you been? We've been here all this time, trying to pack up. And here you are coming and asking for help, Very common, particularly around, in agricultural communities, farming communities. People tell themselves the way to get over this is just to work really hard. Harder than I normally work, which is already really hard. And so people launch into recovery and they work as hard as they possibly can. But the problem is that when they should have been ploughing, they were re-fencing. And when they should have been sowing, they were trying to de-silt the dam or stop the erosion, whatever. And around about 6 months, they look around and think, I haven't done what I need to do to have an income for the next 12 months. I haven't done the farming jobs that I should have done in order to be in a position to earn an income. And so then they will say, I think I need a hand. So we need to be ready for that, because that is a very common thing. I'll come back here and say, hey, was I right? Because you really will see a very significant increase in busyness. 12 months is a very important time post-disaster, because we will have the anniversary of the fire. We'll have the onset of the next fire season around that time, just before. And you lucky guys will have Christmas and New Year thrown into the mix as well. Yeah, so that's already quite a stressful time for lots of people. So this is going to be a time when there'll be lots of activity and lots of requests for support. And it takes so much longer than we think. There's so much longer than what we tell ourselves, in that first little while. We had our 10th anniversary of the bushfires last year, so we were 11 years earlier this month. At the 10th anniversary, there was a whole lot of additional counselling put on in the lead up to and around the 10th anniversary, and we had significant numbers of people applying to receive counselling for the very first time, 10 years after the disaster. So they had carried their grief and distress for 10 years. And eventually, with the gravitas and the kind of momentousness of that 10th anniversary, that prompted me to say, I am not okay with this. I thought I was, but I really am not. And I've given enough of my life to this, and I need to try and get some help. And so there were 6 counsellors put on in our community, and they've been busy ever since. So that's an indication of the long tail. Now, we had a lot of fatalities, and that does exponentially increase the complexity of recovery, but nevertheless, it does help us to understand that it won't be over quick. And that's not an assessment of how good a job people are doing. You can be doing the best job possible. You can be wearing your cape and your undies on the outside of your pants. You are so fabulous at recovery. This is a process that will take time, and people will need time to go through it. So it can feel a bit like this. Every year you spend in a recovering community can feel like 7 years of normal life. That's how much change happens and how many things that people will need to manage in their life. So, some practicalities. How might we do the work? We are reasonably good in Australia at thinking about business continuity. Particularly bigger organisations will have a BCP, a business continuity plan. If a meteor hits our headquarters tomorrow, how would we deliver services for the rest of the day? How would we gear ourselves up to continue our work, for the first week, the first month, and so on? What I want to challenge you to do is to think about community recovery as community continuity. Yeah. One of the principles of national disaster recovery for Australia is use community-led approaches. So in other words, we talk about community-led recovery. It rolls off the tongue like world peace. Who's going to argue against the fact that the community should have some control over their recovery? No one, because it makes good sense. But it's hard to understand how to make that happen, because we all have legislative responsibilities and policies and reports to write about what we are actually doing to support recovery. So there's a bit of a tension there between how the community can really influence it. If we think about community continuity, that becomes much easier. How do we work in ways that will help the community get back into the business of being its community? That's hopefully a slightly more easy way to understand. Now that will look different for different communities. It won't be the same across the board. If you had a community that was predominantly a dairying community, for example, continuity is going to look like restoration of roads, electricity. We need to get cows' milk feed in, milk out, that would support the community being able to pick up the pieces and start to rebuild. If you've got a tourism community, then community continuity would be looking like making sure that the tourist attractions are repaired and able to receive visitors, the hospitality businesses are supported to be reopened, the cafes, the restaurants, etc., so that the infrastructure to support community continuity is there. Does that make sense? So it's just a slightly different way to think about it. Providing help for community groups. Community groups are usually very self-reliant and efficient in the way that they operate, but sometimes after a disaster they need a little bit more of a hand because they've got other things taking up their time. Their operations may have expanded. Maybe the local Rotary was just running the Sunday market, but now they're also helping to manage stock feed, for example, and they're doing extra jobs. Or maybe key players within the community group aren't around because they've had to relocate, because they've lost their homes. And so you might find that it's a really useful thing just to try and provide some support for community groups to be able to function and flourish. Likewise, support for small business. The taxation legislation in Australia means that small businesses can't receive money from appeal funds. And that's very disappointing if you're a small business person, because it kind of feels like the help that everyone else is able to get, you're not able to get. And if we have a loss of small business, then we have an incomplete economic recovery. And that's going to have a big bearing on how well community comes through. So thinking about ways to support small business. That might be as simple as running a buy local campaign. Or it might be about, advertising more broadly. We're seeing some bushfire affected communities, come and visit, come and stay with us. Driving through from Lithgow, looking at the regeneration and the rock formations and stuff like, who would not want to see that? So there's a window here to really promote that. Come and see us. Just come and see us regenerate. That could be the way that happens. Everyone is affected. And this is a bit of a challenging concept, I appreciate, but what we do in our recovery process is we try and sort people out. So we'll have forms, questionnaires, whatever, and we're trying to say, okay, well, you lost your house, you're that group. You just lost your farm fencing, maybe your sheds, okay, that's who you are. Maybe you're not able to work because your employer has been, impacted. And so we're streaming people into different categories by virtue of how the disaster has physically impacted on them. But that only gives us part of the story. And so what I want to encourage you to do is to actually consider that everyone is carrying some level of effect. And then the question becomes, how? How did this disaster, how did this fire affect you? Now, I can give you an example. There's a lady who lived not far from me in the fires that we had. And the fire came through and fortunately for her, her house was spared, so it didn't burn down. Her car was parked in the driveway, it was fine as well. Her pets were inside the house, they were okay. They were out of the area, so everyone was fine. By all measures, she was unaffected by the disaster. Every other house in her street burnt down, and 2 of her neighbours died when the fire went through. Is she affected? Yeah. But not in any way that's going to show up on the form. So if we talk to her about the fact that she's not affected, why do I feel so bad? If I'm not affected, why do I feel like this? So taking the approach that let's assume everyone's affected and then ask how, you're going to get a fuller rendition of the facts. My house survived, but I spent 3 hours sheltering in the creek under a wet blanket with the kids, and we thought we were going to die. That's really the story. The story is not, did your house burn down? But if you say, were you affected, that's how people will hear that question. Well, I've still got a house, so no. So that's important for us to know. Effect belongs to the people who experience it, it's not for us to assess. We had a young man in our community who was a beekeeper, and the fire went through the piece of bush where his hives were and they all burnt. He was distraught. And we're thinking, well, you know, it's unfortunate, it's disappointing. But surely you just go online and get some more bee boxes and you put some more bees in and you're back in business. So someone made some discreet inquiries and we found out that actually they were his grandfather's hives. And then they were his dad's hives. And then they were his hives. And he wanted to be able to hand them on to his boy. You know, so we're not talking about beehives anymore, are we? We're talking about history and legacy and pride. He was so upset that the hives had been lost on his watch. You know, so that's what we're talking about when we talk about effect. It's not for us to determine. It belongs to the person who's experiencing it. We just need to try and understand what it looks like. And we do that by being sort of on the side of caution and assuming effect. And then if someone says, no, I am totally A1, okay, not one problem in the world, you go, great, that's a good outcome. But if you assume that, and that's not the case, that's not a good outcome. So everyone is affected. Disasters don't happen in a vacuum. And by that I mean there were amazing things happening in your community the day before the fire, I know that for sure. And there are amazing things happening in every disaster impacted community the day before, the morning of the disaster, you know. There's all sorts of things that communities are able to do and are doing well. And then they have a disaster. And we have to remember to think back to what was happening before and not actually get drawn into assessing the community by what's now the case. If we do that, we'll end up defining the community by its disaster rather than defining it by all the great stuff that normally happens. Now this is easy to fall into. I can remember being super frustrated by people coming into my community going, oh, so this is Kim. Like, no, it's not. We don't normally look like this. You know, this is not how we normally are. And then I was asked to go up and do some work in Cassowary Coast after Cyclone Yasi. And I'd never been up there before. I got out of the bus at Tully. I remember looking around going, so, this is Tully. And I had to really pull myself up and say, actually, no, this is Tully after a Category 5 cyclone. This is not how Tully normally is. This damaged, broken place is not how this place normally is. There is great stuff happening in Tully. I just can't see it at the moment because of all this debris. But we have to know that we've got to go back before we can go forward. Go back to what was, and then we can go forward to what could be. Starting with the end in mind, when we're thinking about transition, when we have to plan transition of recovery services is right at the start. Okay, so before you start a program, it's really important for you to know what the end looks like. If you can't visualise the end, maybe don't start, because it's probably going to end badly. You know, if you can't imagine what packing this thing up looks like, we're going to do this and then something will happen. That won't be good. Because what will happen is, at the end, when you haven't planned for the end, gaps will open up and people will fall into those gaps. So if I take a kind of random example, supposing your council was to say, we're going to let people take their burnt fencing wire to the tip for free. Bring your burnt fencing wire, you can put it in the tip, no charge. Great, everyone's happy about that. Wire starts to come, trailer loads of wire, it's all good. And then at some point you have a meeting and go, oh, it's just starting to really bite us in terms of the cost of managing the tip, so we better stop that. So as of this week, no more free wire to the tip. And then I roll up with my carefully loaded trailer of rolled up wire, and I get to the tip, and the attendant says, no, sorry, you've got to pay for that. We're not doing free tipping anymore. But yes, my neighbour, hang on a minute, you know, what happened? I don't know, that finished last week. You see what I'm talking about? That's another blow, isn't it, to my recovery? That's another little arrow in the heart, another disappointment that I've got to contend with, because now I have to pay for something that other people have received for free. If, on the other hand, council had said, you can take your burnt fencing wire to the tip for free for 3 months, it will end on the 30th of April. And you say that from the outset, then it's my own fault if I get caught up in that, isn't it? That's just probably bad luck, or I was too busy. But there's no mystery to that, because everybody knows that program is going to last for 3 months. It doesn't mean you can't extend it. It's been so popular, we're going to take it through to the end of June. That's okay. But you're all the time giving people the directions and the parameters that they can navigate as they try and access these programs. No surprises is what we want. Everybody needs to know how it all works. Doesn't mean they'll always listen, but at least you can say, see here on the bottom of the page where it says the 30th of, oh yeah, okay, fair enough. That's easier to deal with than the outrage that you'll feel when you think you've missed out. Recovery to preparedness. Around about September or October of this year, it's going to get warm again. And people are going to start thinking, oh, we could have another fire. Fires could come to our community again. Maybe parts of our community that didn't burn will actually have a fire this year. So helping people to think about preparedness very gently and in a very kind of supported way can be a great way of reinforcing that idea of getting back in control of your life. So you might want to think carefully about how that happens. But there's something about being ready for next time that actually helps people to feel a bit like they've got control. And there is no more attentive audience for a preparedness message than people who've actually had a disaster. Because it's not academic anymore. They know this stuff really happens and they know how hard it is to come through. So thinking about that as part of your recovery planning going forward. And the critical importance of self-care. Just like that, every set of eyes glaze over. You don't know how busy we are if you want to talk to us about self-care. We don't have time for that nonsense, I get it, I totally get it. I understand, and I have been as guilty as anyone in the room of not doing the right thing here. But what I would say about self-care is that if you think about when you fly on a plane, which I do a bit of these days, and every time you sit down in the plane, before the plane even starts to back away from the terminal, the airline steward will say, if oxygen is required, a mask will fall from above you, And you think, oh, I hope that's not necessary. But if it is, a mask will fall, and then they say, be sure to fit your own mask before helping others. Now, why do they say that? That's right. Because if you can't breathe, while you're fiddling around with their mask, you'll pass out. Then because they can't manage their own mask for some reason, they will pass out as well. And so it goes. We've got now 2 people passed out who are no use to anyone. So if you don't want to do self-care for yourself, that's totally fine. That's a grown-up decision that you might make. But maybe think about doing self-care for the people who need you to be okay. Because if you're not fitting your own oxygen mask, you actually can't help anybody else. And there will be people, I'm sure, in your lives who really need you to be okay. So thinking about those, that kind of puts a slightly different complexion on self-care, doesn't it? Now, I'm not talking about grand, complicated trips to Hawaii or anything like that. Yeah? Okay, I'm not going down that road. All I'm talking about is strategic, regular, planned, 30-minute episodes of doing stuff that refills your tank. 3 times a week, 30 minutes, 3 times a week would be a start. An hour, even better. Whatever it is, you'll know. Coffee with a friend, go and read in the library, go and listen to your favourite music.
Just having your lunch break.
Take a lunch break. Well, I'm not going to go there, but yeah, at a minimum, yes, actually stopping and actually moving away from your desk to eat your sandwich, whatever floats your boat. Little purposeful episodes of things that will just help you to remember who you are and connect with what matters to you will make a huge difference. You might say, I'm going to lay on the couch and I'm going to read my new book for 30 minutes. If, however, you're laying on the couch going, oh my God, I shouldn't be laying here, I've got so much to do, that's not going to work. All right, so you have to actually let yourself have the time and tell yourself this is important because it will enable me to go a bit further. We come out of the blocks in recovery sprinting. don't we? And then after a while we realised, oh, I've got to slow down a bit because this is a long marathon that I'm on now. And that's true of people who are affected, and it's true of people who are working in the recovery space. And recovery is a powerfully challenging environment to work in. It'll be the work of your life, let's be clear. You will never make as big a difference to people, certainly in your local government or service provider careers, as you have the potential to make in recovery. But you do have to look after yourself, because it can damage people as well. So, don't make me come back here. There'll be lots of well-intentioned inquiries in the weeks and months to come about this concept of back to normal. You know, people from outside the area will say, how's it going? You know, Picton, voluntarily, how's it back to normal? And you'll get this mental picture and go, yeah, I don't think so. You know, I don't even know what that means anymore. I don't actually know how to even describe that. When you lose every single thing you own, including the house you live in and all the things you choose to surround yourself with, back is not available to you. You know, it's not there. You can't go back to that life. So you've got to go forward. So recovery is about looking to the future. Where are we heading? How are we going to get there? You know, and normal is a pretty subjective idea, isn't it? So what will happen is that eventually people will be able to once again live a life that they value. And I think that's probably when they're recovered, when what they're doing and how they're living makes sense to them and that they can get value and enjoyment from it. And if we can think about people as bushfire survivors and not bushfire victims, it will change the way we relate to them. And it will also potentially change the way they feel about themselves. Now, if I was to give you a sheet of paper and say, can you write on one side of the paper all the words you can think of to describe a survivor, and then we turn the sheet of paper over and I ask you to write all the words that you can think of to describe a victim, they'd be different lists, wouldn't they? They'd be different lists of words, even though we are potentially talking about the same person. So that simple change can make a huge difference in terms of the confidence we have in people to be okay and the confidence that they have in themselves to actually get through this experience. Where there's been fatalities, after the first 48 hours, the victims are the people who died. And everyone else is survivors. And so that's a really simple thing that we can do to try and change people's trajectory. Now, if I'm honest with you, I have to say that there were many, many times in the first few years after our disaster that I thought, no, we're caught. You know, there's no way. There is no way we're going to be able to come through this without tearing ourselves apart. You know, there's so much angst, so much grief, so much distress. We had so many funerals, and just so much destruction. And I couldn't see over the horizon to whatever was coming next. It was just too much. So I have to be able to say to you that, in fact, the lesson here for me was the communities come through the most incredibly distressing experiences, and they can come through it and they can find a way forward, they can support each other, and that's partly to do with the resilience of the community itself, but it's also importantly to do with all the people who help with that process, all the people who come to work in recovery and who are prepared to go the extra mile, bend the rules a bit, you know, do what's necessary in order for that necessary work to happen. So I wish you every success. It's a bit hard to see, but my contact details are there. I quite like to talk about this stuff if you haven't already worked that out yet, so you're very welcome to contact me. If you get to a point in the road where you think, oh, should we do this or that, you know, I'm happy for you to drop me a line or give me a phone call. Also happy to answer any questions because we've got a bit of time left. So if there's anything that you're thinking about particularly, or you might want to ask me, you know, after we finish, that's fine too. Or any questions or comments or thoughts that any of that might have brought up, then I'm very happy to have a chat now.
Can I just say before we go to questions that I think on behalf of everyone, I found that so insightful and informative, and I really learned a lot from that, and it challenged a lot of the preconceptions I had about recovery. It made me think about a whole lot of things in a whole new way. So thank you, and I really felt like I learned something on a Friday afternoon, which is quite...
Not always.
It's almost un-Australian.
I know. Yes, and imagine that. And so thank you, Peter, for that. Look, the thing is with this, this is just wisdom born of a bit of exposure and a bit of experience. At the end of the day, if you're not sure what to do in recovery, you should always do what you would want. You know, you should treat people the way you would want to be treated, like that sort of do unto others thing. Like if you're really up against it and you think, I just don't know what the right thing here is, then imagine it's your experience, your house, you know, your family, and then you do what you would want. And that's why it's really easy to communicate differently when you take that approach. Because guess what? You would want to know, warts and all, the story. So if you think about that's what you would want, then that is in fact what the community wants as well. So that's kind of a bit of a guide, I guess. When you find yourself in uncharted territory, stop and think, if this was me, what would I want? And then that helps to, kind of clear the way a bit. But yeah, thank you for that feedback. I really appreciate it.
Off the back of what Peter was saying, it was brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you, Ken. But it's also validated a lot of stuff that we're doing.
Of course.
It's helped to crystallise and give you a feeling we're doing.
Yeah.
Because the last thing, and I've said this quite a few times to our Recovery and Resilience Committee, we need to be doing what people want, not what we think they need.
Yeah, that's right.
And I need you to tell me and tell us and others when's the right time to do things, because you're connected to the ground and hearing what's going on.
Yeah.
And one thing that's dear to my heart, and I know other people's heart, is we want it to be community-led.
Yeah.
Because it's the only way communities are going to come out of this.
That's right. Nothing worse than being disempowered by the recovery process, because you're already disempowered by the disaster.
Exactly.
You're already on your knees and you feel like you can't do anything. Exactly. And then recovery rolls over the top of you, and it really can be, the second wave of distress and disappointment. So absolutely, and I should have actually said that, and I normally remember to say, I've just said this presentation a few times in the last few days and I'm starting to forget exactly who I've said what to. Absolutely, that a lot of this is about what you guys are already doing. And maybe we were doing that and now we know why, or maybe it's like, well, we're doing that and we already knew why, but it's good to know that that's a good thing to do. We do a lot of this stuff instinctively and our instincts are usually pretty right. So the main challenge, and I guess the main point of difference for lots of people is the pressure to go fast.
That's something
that's
we're up
hard.
against.
Everyone is always up against that.
And when there is lots of opportunity for grant funding and money that's become available, quick do this, quick do that, apply funding for this so we can do that. We actually need to be talking to the community and saying, what do you want us to spend money on?
I once heard it described as a chance to come up with our problems before you arrive at your solutions. Like to actually give the community time to think through what the implications of this are. In our community, we have 3 primary schools, so we're a linear development across a ridge, 13 k's from end to end. We have Kinglake Primary School, we have Kinglake West Primary School, and quite unimaginatively we have Middle Kinglake Primary School, so that's the 3 schools. Now when the fire went through, Middle Kinglake School was burnt down. For a really long time we've been saying, wouldn't it be great to have a year 7 to 8 campus in our community, because all of our kids have to go out of the community to go to high school and they have to travel a long distance to do that. And so while the community was going, actually, this is unfortunate, but it could be the opportunity we've been looking for, Education Department says we're rebuilding the primary school. Bang. We go, no, definitely, getting rebuilt. So back to having 3 primary schools and no high school again. That's the sort of stuff that, on face value, it's a bit of an easy response, isn't it? We had a school, we'll build it back, no angst, nobody jumping up and down. But the community was already well and truly ready to have that conversation about what if we got a campus built that one of the local high schools could manage, and then our kids could stay in their community a bit longer until they were big year 9s instead of little year 7s. That would be the great outcome. But we jump to, you know, the solution before the nature of the problem was even understood. So that's some of the stuff that we have the opportunity to advocate for. You won't always win, because sometimes they're very powerful decisions made at very high and lofty levels. But at least if we can encourage people to have a more realistic understanding of the time frame of recovery, that would be a great thing. Because the media will tell you that, you know, it needs to happen quickly. State and federal government will quite often tell you that it needs to happen quickly, but in actual fact, for it to be sustained and meaningful for the community, it needs to take the time it takes. And that's, you know, that's a message, I guess, that we want to get a tattoo, you know, whatever. But you need to, that's something you're probably going to need to sell quite hard.
I've got a question. Acknowledging that recovery is a very long process,
yeah.
We're planning to have a series of workshops, I guess you'd call it. We did this after the 2016 flood.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about processes whereby you bring members of the community together, emergency services, whatever the groupings are, to talk about the experience and to reflect on it and to learn from it. Do you have any comments on the do's and don'ts when it comes to those kind of reflective workshop processes and their role in recovery?
The thing I will say about recovery generally is that connection breeds resilience. You know, so resilience is underpinned by how much connection people can feel. So any events and activities that bring people together are fantastic, because we get strength from each other. We hear each other's experience. We check in on, find out how each other are going, and that really helps to consolidate the sense of resilience in the community. I love the idea of actually unpacking the experience, and I think that's something we don't do anywhere near enough on a national scale. Because sometimes in order to move on, all you need was just a chance to be able to say, you know what, I really hated the way that happened, or I really wish we'd done that twice and not once, or, you know, whatever. People carry that stuff with them and it weighs them down, whereas if they had the opportunity just to get it out in the open, it would have been a really great thing to do. What I would say is that I think that they should be facilitated, and that they should be in sort of setups like this, you know, like small groups of people working around tables, coming up with their suggestions about what worked, what didn't work.
Which is what we envisage.
Yeah, what we do differently. You don't want theatre seating, you know, with the people at the front last at the great blood sports, you know, we don't want that sort of a public meeting, but a tremendous amount of good can come from giving community members the opportunity to tap into their own knowledge and reflect on the things that they thought worked really well that we would want to keep. The inevitable things that work badly, this is not about blame, but it's about saying disasters are disastrous, and so there will always be things that haven't quite worked the way we would hope, and we want to learn from that. And then, if we had our time over, what would we do differently? What are the sort of things that we could change that might make this process easier? So those three questions are all that you would need to kind
And then
follow.
following on from that is seeing results and actions.
Absolutely. So here's our emergency management plan, and this is where we've plugged in this information. Or here's our recovery plan, our brand new updated recovery plan, and here's what we've learned from this experience. So absolutely, and here's our resilience network, and here's the activities that they're doing around the stuff.
And here's the long-term community recovery and resilience plan, activities and programs.
Fantastic.
Where we want to be, that's great. Developed by the community and led by.
Yeah, and that would be a fantastic outcome. So, in short, I love those ideas. I facilitated one of those meetings in Dungog.
Oh, well,
that's not the story, but the story is I facilitated one of those meetings in Dungog 5 years after the floods.
We worked with Dungog after the floods.
Okay.
To do ours after the 16 floods.
Right.
We shared our learnings and resources with them.
Yeah. Well, we went and did the workshop. It was only last year, I think. And sort of, you know, conventional wisdom would have been it's too late. You know, it's too late to do a community debrief 5 years on. We had 47 people. The room was packed. And I had a lady come up afterwards and say, you know, I've said things tonight that I haven't said for 5 years. And she said, what's more, I said them about someone who was sitting working at our table. I thought, well, go you know, but there was just this terrific sense of, you know, and then the next day we were doing some planning around a community resilience network. And we just wouldn't have been able to have that conversation if we hadn't got that stuff out in the open first, you know. So these things can get carried around and they're a great blocker to people being able to imagine something different because they're kind of holding on to the thing that they really wished hadn't happened or the thing that really should have happened. And so, yeah, by having those conversations in a timely sort of way, not too soon, but you know, not 5 years later either, that's probably a bit too long, but still, by having those conversations with the community, what you can do is you're really demonstrating your genuine desire to learn from and to sort of build upon the lessons, you know, that we always get in disasters.
We actually had Ken Maroney and Dave Owens running out.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah.
Workshops. We're looking for someone to help us again.
Wow.
Was that again?
Yeah.
We would love to chat to you.
Yeah, well that's fine.
Particularly if you're able to assist us or know someone who can.
Yeah, no, because I just think the facilitation piece is not, what it means is someone from out of the area can come and ask the hard questions and then go home at the end of the night, you know, and it's like, I'm going to poke the bear and then I'm heading out, you know, but, you know, it's someone from within the community or from council. Often there's some constraints around just being able to have that really, you know, bold conversation, so, yeah.
So, I've got 2 questions.
Yes.
So the first one is that as Service New South Wales, we're obviously new to the disaster.
Welcome. You know, welcome to the space.
Yes. So my first question is that as things were happening, like around the community, there was things that we could have done. So, for example, unregistered vehicle permits, if people needed to move vehicles because they were in a fire-affected area, that was something that we were doing for no cost.
Right.
Okay, people who've been impacted by the bushfires, you can get a free birth certificate, you can get a free driver's licence and that sort of stuff. I just want to know at what point and who is the people that we should be communicating that to, because, like, unfortunately, the service centre here, it's Mittagong or it's Narellan.
Wow, yes.
Okay, so there's sort of no in between, and I think there's services and things that we offer, but we're not really promoting that. Like we know that you can do it, and then someone will find out, and then obviously that's how it gets via the community.
Yeah, but it's not ideal, is it? You know, because it's relying on the right person talking to the right person, you know.
Yeah.
And it's a great point that you raise. So one of the most beneficial things we can ever do for people in recovery is to try and provide a bit of a roadmap to how to navigate. And sometimes that's done through a kind of formalised case management process, but a lot of people don't need that. They just need to know that it's you guys who do that thing.
Yeah.
You know, that's all they have. Oh, okay, now I'm on to it, you know. So I think if you can think about maybe creating some resources, and maybe they already exist around, if you need this, this is where to go, and then having that as a collective production. You know, so council stuff is on there, Service New South Wales stuff is on there, OEM stuff is on there, you know, whoever's got help office, the Resilience Network, what they're doing is on there, you know, so I can pick that up and I go, okay, I don't need that, don't even understand that, but gee, I really need a vehicle permit, you know, and so you're helping people cut through all of the confusion. And it's really awful if, you know, you're laying awake at night worrying about how you're going to get that unregistered vehicle from point A to point B. And then all I need to do is go and talk to the nice people from Welfare New South Wales, and it would have been a problem solved. But instead I've worried about it for 3 weeks and maybe not done some other stuff because, you know, so I think getting the right information, the communication, getting the right information into the hands of the people who need it is probably the most powerful thing to do. If we don't do anything else well, just do that. That's going to be a huge thing. So yes, I would be thinking about, the other thing you can really do, and this is incredibly effective, is ask people, where do you get your information? Before the fires, if you wanted to know something, where would you look? In our community, we have a magazine that's published once a month. It's called the Mountain Monthly. And it has been going for 35 years. And everyone reads it. Everyone sweats on it, you know, oh, Mountain Monthly's out, you know, and so it's just one of those things. And it's full of newsy, you know, reports from community groups and ads and tradies and all that stuff. So then we had a bushfire, and the Victorian Bushfire Reconstruction and Recovery Authority said, we're going to produce a recovery newsletter. And we said, well, we've got this magazine. You know, you could put your, no, we need to have our own, you know. Why? Because now I have to go and find 2 things at the shop. And chances are they're all gone, you know, like, you know what I mean, you're just making it harder than it needs to be. So if that information had been incorporated into the magazine that we already read religiously every month from cover to cover, how much more sensible would that have been, you know? So ask the community, where do you get your information? Mostly now, it's very often community Facebook pages. So you might be making little tiles with your Welfare New South Wales comms people, and you can just plug into community Facebook pages in fire-affected areas, and that would be a really great way to point people to your service, and a really easy and virtually no cost way to do that. So, yeah. And your other question, you have two questions.
This is a bit of a high-level question.
Sure.
So, and obviously this is just my personal opinion. So Service New South Wales, so obviously this is new to us,
Yeah.
okay, and we're working with Office of Emergency Management, we're working with Public Works, we're doing this, we're doing that. And sometimes I get the feeling that as our organisation, obviously we're different when it comes to government because we're out there, we're new and all this type of stuff, that maybe we're overstepping the mark with some of the things that we should or shouldn't be doing.
Sure.
So my question is, what's the best way in regards to working with the other state organisations so that we're all on the same page?
Yeah.
Because it just seems that, like, we are in the recovery centres, we're doing this, we're doing that, and then someone from Office of Emergency Management contacted me, and then I sat down and had a meeting with those people and said, right, this is what we can do for you, this, that and the other, and then, like, I've even got someone from my organisation here that's doing the same thing that I'm doing, and then I sort of think, like,
where are the boundaries?
how do we all work together
Yeah.
to get on the same page and make sure that we've all got the same message and that we're all doing the same thing, rather than Service New South Wales is doing that, Office of Emergency Management's going ahead and doing that. Like, I think it causes confusion for the residents as well.
Well, I mean, the thing is, if we're confused,
Yeah.
how much more likely is it that people have been in high adrenaline and been
Yeah.
about the fire and things?
And I think, can I just add to what Vanessa's saying? I agree, absolutely agree, because I mean, we didn't even know we were both going to be here today, which is fine. We're doing different sort of roles, and that's okay, and there's other people, I'm sure.
Yeah.
However, I think what it is the fact that some of it is led by, we just have to do it, you know what I mean? And that's you know, it's you know, you're Service in South Wales, you're going to be the front door. And so we just do it.
Yeah.
You know, and we do it for the right reasons, we do it for the people, but I agree with what Vanessa's saying, is that people aren't always coming to where we are. And, you know, we have done disaster recovery centres, we man them every single day, we man them 7 days a week. We literally have been to any roadshow we can be at and talk it and really spruik it, and I know myself with some of the councils, because we deal with the council part, that we'll speak to all the disaster affected councils and get into their websites, but there is a gap. Because it is it's massive.
So big, that's right.
It is massive. And I think some of it's just reactive because you just have to do it and it has to get done.
I'm not sure there is a gap. I think the lack of information is the gap. I don't think there's a problem if you guys overlap. If you're both doing the same thing, as long as what you're providing is honest, is current, is the correct information. And the more areas that it's coming from, and the correct information, and this is coming from the community, from the community perspective, we don't care who does it, where it's coming from. If it's all, you know, like, as you said, a big newsletter, Facebook, you know, Service New South Wales has this available, Office of OEM has that, Council has that, Red Cross has this, Centrelink has that, everybody has this. But if you go to one of them, this organisation can point you to the right, if you're not on the right link, and linking all those services clearly. Instead of getting on the phone to somebody and say, oh no, we don't do that.
We don't do that.
Hang up and you start here.
So we're familiar with the idea of no wrong door. You know, we hear about that in sort of service, particularly in health provision. That means it doesn't matter what door you knock on, it's the right door. Because the person behind that door, even if it's not their thing, will know whose thing it is. And so therefore, it doesn't matter which agency is approached for a service or information. So that's where you guys have to really collaborate really well and become champions for each other's information. So, yeah, I'm Service New South Wales, and I don't do that, but I actually know that Wallumbilla Council does do it. And they're doing it really well, and they're doing it like this.
But getting that information,
And that's what
community centres
we
to
found
carry.
is that finally, that we've got all of the agencies to come on set days,
Yes.
and they all sit
Yeah.
in a line pretty much. So when people come in that are not at home and who have forgotten who they spoke to 4 or 6 weeks ago for all the right reasons.
All that is there for them.
Yeah, that's right. So you can sit down and you can say, right, start with the Red Cross, then move to Lions, then move to, and when Service New South Wales were there with Centrelink, that was just wonderful. You know, but we need them back a little bit. And people are now, and I think, and over that 10, and we've been there for about 10 weeks, we've trained and we have trained the survivors that they will be there on those days and everything is in one spot, and they are coming because they know that they don't have to go to 5 different buildings and repeat their stories, most importantly 5 times to 5 different unfamiliar faces, if you like. So
and
that's a real bonus.
And it's a fantastic process. You know, what I'm hearing about that is what I would consider to be a person-centred approach or a community-centred approach. Not this is our system and you have to come and fit in.
Right, you've got to find
this is actually we're going to come and fit in with what the community actually needs. And so then when I say people at the centre, that's what we're talking about. So how do we remove the barriers for people that need to access our service?
It's so hard to get them to come
I know.
You know,
I know.
Honestly,
Because
and they don't talk to each other.
I know, and we think they do.
It's hopeless.
We see the little Waratah and we think you guys all talk to each other, you know, and so that's part of the challenge too. The community doesn't care that you're OEM or Department of, you know, whatever, or welfare, or, you know, it's just you're all from the government, you know.
But that's only government, it's all the other agencies as well.
Yeah, of course.
There's no other connections.
That's right, between. And similarly with council, I don't care whether you work for planning or health or library or, you know, you work for council. So we're not making those distinctions, you know, and we're not making them ordinarily, here's the newsflash, like we're not making them before the disaster.
No.
And we're sure as hell not making them after.
The other issue, is people getting asked to prove it.
Oh.
Prove it. Now, if there's one agency that you talk to, like council, you issue a document that says this person's house is such and such an address, it was burned. And I know that takes time, you've got to get all that information. But then you've got that document to go to the Red Cross, to go to, because going through that all again, filling out that paperwork, such and such a date, what day of the fire,
Every time you go through that, a little bit of you dies.
It does.
You know, as an impacted person,
It's all too hard.
they go, oh, that's it, I'm done. You know, so many times, I cannot fill out another form. I cannot tell my story one more time. You know,
You're getting
so
copies of those forms to take and pass on.
remember what I said about we can make the trough deeper? This is what we're talking about. You know, when our processes require people to relive, because they're not just telling you facts. In their mind, they're replaying the whole event. You know, where they were, what the house looked like the first time they saw it. When they're saying, I lost my house, that's what's in their mind. And that, over and over and over, is distressing.
And that's been the other good thing for us, is because we have those lists. So if there are people that are new, we obviously introduce ourselves and just say, you know, what's your address? And then with everybody else there, all the other agencies, we just go, these are new, they're fine. So they don't get asked that question.
No, fantastic.
Right? They don't get asked it. So as soon as we say, no, they're on the list, they're fine, that's it. They never get asked again when they go through all of the agencies there, that same question over and over and over.
So the job is, when you get a little bit of clear space, to write this process up. And then it gets plugged into the recovery plan. This is how we do it here. Because we know it works, we know it's person-centred, we know that it actually, you know, opens the way for people to be able to get the help that they need. So, because we don't write it down, and we don't actually understand why it worked, then the chances of it being replicated in 10 years' time, when maybe we've all gone to other things, maybe we are having the cruise in the French River area and we're not here to help, then someone else can pick it up and go, oh, that makes sense. I see why that matters, you know. So evaluation, monitoring evaluation, we don't do that at all in recovery. That's our next frontier. Is not just to do something like this because we did it like this last time, but to do it like this because it's been monitored and evaluated and found to be best practice. That's our next opportunity. So, on that note, I better finish. Go.
I've got one question.
Sure.
It's okay if it's off the planet.
No.
I liked your discussion earlier about the bonds and
Yeah.
how they become kind of inward looking. So my observation would be that what we have here at the moment would be like concentric rings.
Yeah, sure.
Depending on
what's happening
your experience
where
and where you are. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my question is, okay, it takes some time and things eventually, change and rearrange. But meanwhile, the whole idea is to move forward.
Yeah.
So my question is about how within all of those circles, what your thoughts are about how people can maintain relationships that respect where people are, but also don't kind of just leave people behind or leave clumps of that's right. So everyone's going sort of in the same direction,
And I think
not sort of.
part of it is about helping the community to understand all that stuff, helping people even just to understand the effects of high adrenaline. You might get someone like Rob to come up and talk to the community, or David Younger is his colleague. I know David's been doing some visits in New South Wales. You might actually get someone with expertise in that stuff just to talk to the community and say, you might be feeling like this, so they all go, yeah, I am, and so then you can start to unpack why that's important, and how you might manage that. But just helping people to understand that, everyone is going to be a little bit not like they normally are for a while, and that's part of this experience. Trying to encourage people to be patient with each other, it's hard, because you're in high adrenaline, so it's hard to find that, but that's really the message. And creating opportunities for people to connect in very relaxed and natural ways. So community barbecues, community events, breakfast for farmers, talking about weed eradication, because they won't come for themselves, but they'll come and find out what to do about the blackberries that are springing up in the back paddock, so being creative about the reason that you get people together, knowing that the good will happen, the magic will happen when they are all together, because it's like, oh, there's so-and-so, I haven't seen him for ages, and I'll go and have a chat to him, and together we'll kind of reconnect in a way that actually more closely represents what we would normally have than that kind of pressure cooker, relationships. We have to remind people to remember what they cared about, remember what they valued, remember to start to do the things they like to do again, because otherwise it's just an unrelenting grind, so making it okay to have a bit of fun, to celebrate. If you have a community event that you normally have it. It's not like you have to be, just fully committed to the sort of stress and strain that is recovery. And we often see, I think Kangaroo Island in South Australia had their race meeting recently, and thousands of people turn up to the race meeting to kind of support the Kangaroo Island community. That's really great, and everyone's mood just lifts a little, things get a little bit easier and incrementally over time. But it's not a kind of a magic solution. It really is just about reminding the community about why they choose to be part of this community, what they love about it, why it matters to them. Helping people to reconnect with those feelings is often a big part of that process, But, it's complicated and it doesn't sort of just, smoothly occur. It can be a bit like that, so, yeah.
Yeah, actually agree with that.
All right. I'm going to catch a plane now.
Well, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So I wish you well, and please be in touch with something I can help with. So thanks.